Cold penal changes, feather on the bone, arc of eternity, rain around the storm. We are the old people, we are the new people, we are the same people, wiser than before.
Welcome to Crime Scenes and Cultures, where we seek to demystify the mysterious for public safety agencies and forensic professionals. Joined, as always, by my friend and cohort forensic archaeologist, Steven Katz. Steven, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Tony, and I'm rather excited to kick off today's show and meet our guest.
Absolutely. Well, Steven, throughout the years, I've consulted on a number of cases where crime scene investigators have discovered elements of different cultural materials at responding to scenes, whether that be, officers responding to an incident scene, crime scene investigators responding to a crime scene. And in most of these situations, we find that the elements that were found, the materials at these scenes, were simply indicators of an individual's involvement in maybe a religious or philosophical tradition that really didn't have anything to do with the scene itself. Years ago, there was such a focus on if you find specific materials related to a specific religion or philosophical system, that these were indicators that they definitely had something to do with a crime. And I would dare say, if you came into most people's homes and simply saw their life as it is, you would find indicators of perhaps something that they consider sacred, and whether that's a family Bible, whether that is a particular altar, whether that's a copy of the Quran, that is indicators that of humanity than the things that we consider sacred. Examples that come to mind with this is these materials are like pieces of art. They speak. They tell us about not only perhaps what culture an individual may be affiliated with, but also perhaps something that they may be going through, or part of their daily life, or part of their worldview. Through the years, we've seen cases where there may even be evidence of photographs or written names discovered within specific shrines or sacred spaces. Sometimes we've even seen cases where clothing and even jewelry that belong to someone other than the victim or individual might be discovered at a scene. This is a little bit curious. In some cases, we've even seen specific postures of icons, statues that might reflect the need for an individual's protection. The presence of specific materials might even reflect the need for defensive assistance from the spiritual realm. So in researching various religious traditions around the world, we see there are examples of cultural practices that might indicate someone's reliance on a spiritual power for protection. Today, we are bringing on a guest who is not only someone who focuses on this area in her writings, but is also a practitioner. And we'd like to introduce a friend of the show, Amy Blackthorn. Amy is the award-winning author of the best-selling Blackthorn's Botanical series, including the books Blackthorn's Protection Magic, A Witch's Guide to Mental and Physical Self-Defense. Amy is a certified firearms instructor and self-defense expert with 15 years in private security. She is a witch and an ordained member of the Wiccan clergy. Amy has appeared in the Huffington Post, Fox News, and AP Newswire. And in fact, Netflix described her as a truly gifted medium on the show Top 10 Secrets and Mysteries in the episode Supernatural Abilities. And welcome our friend and our guest, Amy, to Crime Scenes and Cultures. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, this has been a long time coming. Amy and I have known each other for several years and have stayed in contact through the years, and I'm always impressed with Amy's work. And recently spent some time reading some of her work focusing on incense, which was a very fascinating book. And if you're interested in specific components related to incense, her works are really good sources for this. Amy, going as far back into the the anthropological record of some of the giants in anthropology, such as Evans Pritchard, when he was working among the Azande, he identified specific materials and rituals that the Azande were using for protection from sorcery. And even today we see contemporary uses of specific tools by cultures such as Tibetan Buddhism, where specific materials are used to spiritually protect or defend from outside negative energies. We see the articulate work that those who are involved in ceremonial magic go to create forms of protection during rituals and ceremonies.
Well, Tony, reflecting back on my formative years in archaeology, I'm not going to tell you how long ago that was, but it was at University of Alabama. I'm reminded that an artifact is an object made by a human being, typically an item of cultural or historical interest or value. In terms of protective artifacts, I have encountered during my tenure as a forensic archaeologist, they tend to be more or less in a grave burial context or a mass fatality incident. Some of the artifacts, like you mentioned earlier, are jewelry, but I find a lot of things like saint medals, crosses, and even, I guess it's hard to recover them, but a lot of clothing, especially, just the little shrouds and everything that come along with them. So it brings me up to a question for Amy. Amy, when we speak of magic, what are we speaking of? And furthermore, when we mention protective magic, what would that mean?
Magic is the process of changing our circumstances through the power of our will. Magic is agency. It's the willpower to change our life circumstances. So protection magic isn't only the ability to keep yourself safe from curses, hexes, or jinxes. It also encompasses our ability to set those energies in our home to safe and feel that security in that space.
Well, that's perfect explanation. Thank you so much.
I've been making an executive protection that I missed my tarot clients, the police consults, and the holistic atmosphere. So coming out of the broom closet, it was definitely something I thought about telling my coworkers and being forthright with my religious practices. One day I didn't have that quote. I no longer had the choice. A coworker came to me and said, "Hey, so I hear you're a witch." My goodness, who have you been talking to? It was a very scary moment, but the next thing I knew, the entire staff knew. A guy in charge of watching all the security cameras called to see if I magically changed the colors of all the orchids in the display behind me. My patrol officer stopped by to see if I went to the same high school as Tabitha from Bewitched. Well, I don't think this officer had any malice in mind. It can be a scary thing to have that agency taken away from you.
Amy, let me ask you, in understanding magic, why would someone need protective magic?
The world we live in is dangerous, and we're reminded of that every time we watch the news. Domestic violence, stalking, rapes, crimes against children. This is why out of all the magical disciplines, protection magic is the most important. It's crucial to be well-versed and experienced in protection magic, to have a personal safety practice that is ongoing, and that extends beyond curses, hexes, and jinxes to include real-time monitoring of your personal bodily, home, and psychic security. Protection magic is a cyclical responsibility. From Cooper's color code of situational awareness to how you share information online, we are our first line of defense. Every jurisdiction has its own rules and regulations that govern how we can protect our persons, home, and loved ones, but they can't take away the knowledge of how to keep them safe.
Amy, I remember several years ago visiting a priest in an African tradition, and he had a client who was in a relationship with someone who was very abusive and violent. And the priest asked this particular person to bring something that belonged to the abuser. And the client had brought a pair of the abuser's tennis shoes to the priest. And the priest placed these shoes in a particular shrine of a specific deity that was said to deal with matters related to justice. Could you speak to how concepts of contagious or sympathetic magic might be utilized against someone that might be considered a threat?
Of course. So imagining holding a bottle of water, clear, clean, cold water. And we take the lid off and add a drop of red food coloring. Depending on the volume of water, we might not even see a change to that water, but the water now contains that dye. So even if we run it through filters, we're never going to get that drop of coloring back out as an intact drop. By adding magic to everyday items, necklaces, rings, I've blessed Kevlar and level 3 trauma plates, even a friend's battering ram because he always likes to be the first in on the door. We're adding magic to those everyday items, something that we can carry on a person and feel that extra level of safety. So when we pray for a loved one's safe return home, that's magic. For it to be sympathetic magic, you'd have to do something like lighting a candle next to the photo for the loved one for whom you're working with. Sympathetic means that we're bringing sympathy to an item relating to that person. So someone's metal, someone's shoes. We're looking for magical DNA, so to speak. We're looking for somebody to attach the item we're holding or working with to the person from who it belongs. So you might be thinking, I've seen Catholics do that. Why isn't that magic? I'd say that it is. In the case of specific threat, I'll go back to the domestic violence scenario. The same photo from the previous example could be bound in ribbon to protect the victim from an aggressor. Black ribbon might be used because the color black is believed to have protective qualities. Just seeing a photo on an altar can be alarming to someone from outside of a magical culture, and there are many. But assuming that any harm is intended to the person in the photo is a bad call.
You know, that's a tremendous thought, and I really appreciate that because we, as outsiders, particularly in the public safety realm, understanding different cultural practices, you know, we at one point in history and still to a degree today, we'll receive information. Well, if something is colored black, it's always used for some sort of evil purpose. Or, you know, if there was a use of a figure, you know, a puppet, a doll of some kind, we immediately go back to these Hollywood views of quote, voodoo dolls where, you know, nothing could be further from the truth in these concepts, but we tend to fall back on some of this information regarding things like things that are colored black or something that may be look like a specific figurine. So, Amy, let me ask you, starting from the outside of a residence, and let me throw this caveat out there that we are talking about different traditions. So what may be true for one specific tradition may not necessarily be true for another tradition. And perhaps maybe how someone from a Wiccan worldview may create something different than someone from, say, a Haitian Vodou worldview, as far as specifics and putting together different materials, different aesthetics for spiritual work. But we do see these commonalities. And I know in a lot of magical traditions, we see the creation of what some people have called wards or specific amulets for protection. So how might, if someone was to encounter one of these objects working a particular scene, how might that look to us?
So if you're coming onto a scene, we start with the wide view and sort of look for what doesn't belong. Just as multiple security cameras might give a hint that someone inside is afraid, multiple amulets show the same thing. So what is an amulet? It's an empowered object that the person believes has a power to affect change. So it could be a wind chime using to dispel negative energies, or a bird feeder to bring in allies of nature. It could be a sigil or a symbol painted on the doormat instead of welcome. The point is that they look at everyday items most people wouldn't even look twice at. But seeing them all together means that you're working overtime to make sure they're as protected as they can be.
And what tremendous insight that Mike can give us for someone who is a victim of violence, that there is this, you know, warning that the individual, the victim, may be aware that there is a threat that is out there and the need for spiritual protection. Now, obviously, finding something as a form of protection at a residence or a business doesn't necessarily mean that person is fully aware possibly of violence against themselves, but it's definitely something to sort of put in our back pocket and consider as we look at these scenes. Amy, in your book, Blackthorn's Protection Magic, you mentioned the use of materials such as salt and witch hazel as components used in some cultural practices of spiritual protection. Could you elaborate a little on this?
Absolutely. So we've walked further into the scene, and you're at someone's door for an interview, and you see a line of white chalk or even brick dust on the ground by the front door. Training tells us that anything out of the ordinary is something to take note of, but isn't necessarily harmful. Seeing crystals or special rocks on the outside of the home are usually part of a ward or a magical security system. So how do you know the difference between landscaping rocks and special rocks? So traditional rocks can be used, but crystals are more often used than traditional landscaping rocks because the crystalline structure has clarity for the magic that they're doing, and frankly, they look nice. Individual crystals have specific properties, but it's a good rule to check out the color of the stones. The most common stones used in protective security systems are white or black stones like selenite or black tourmaline. White is cleansing and is a combination of all the colors in the light spectrum, and black grounds anything negative and is protection. So they each have associated uses. Green stones are associated with money and purple associated with intuition. But frankly, if you start with black and white, then you're going to get a nice grounding understanding of what's going on inside. Plants can also be part of that warding system that we talked about. For example, someone hiding from a stalker might plant a plant like mugwort, which is a common weed that's found on 6 continents, outside of the home to protect them from that stalker.
Tremendous. This knowledge of these specific materials and their ability to provide this energy, this spiritual essence, is extremely valuable. And this is definitely something that we're all learning from. I remember traveling to a public shrine for the Mexican folk saint Santa Muerte. And at this site, and also at a Congo-based religious site, I noticed that there were a number of mirrors, where small mirrors, large mirrors, and even one particular crime scene at a death scene where there was a large mirror above a bed, and it was sort of angled out as someone coming into the room from the outside, it would reflect back toward them. What purpose does a mirror serve in some traditional rituals of protection?
The great thing about understanding magic, especially at a crime scene, is that it's all about practicality. Mirrors reflect light, so we use them to reflect energy. They can be set in a room with a black candle to reverse negative energy directed towards the victim. You could see a mirror lying on a table with salt or black stones and maybe a white candle to purify the home of any lingering negativity. Think of it as a magical HEPA filter. Some witches, and yes, men can be witches too, ally themselves with the cycles of the moon. So they may be doing their magical housekeeping at the new moon when everything is fresh and new and the month is starting. A mirror can be standing alone with one or more tarot cards laid out in front of it to repel a violent ex or to invite beloved family members to protect them. Contrary to what the C-list horror movies tell you, the death card doesn't mean death and pentagrams aren't inherently evil. Symbols are symbols. It takes the power of belief to make them anything other than that symbol. Your favorite iced tea could be a magical potion if you prayed over it first.
That's interesting. Amy, I got a question. When you're looking at possible victims at a death scene, what sort of items might the investigators see on the body that might indicate the need for protection?
There's a lot of overlap here culturally. A witch might use prayer beads similar to how a Catholic might pray the rosary. Necklaces with sacred symbols are used for daily protection. Pentacles, or a physical pentagram necklace, could be used for protection with 1 point up. It symbolizes the 4 elements plus spirit inside of a protective ring. For example, if you see 2 points up, people say, okay, is that Satan? No, it's never Satanists. The 2 points up represent the inward journey to deal with your own inherent issues. It's not necessarily a man over God, it's just man over himself. When we talk about on the body itself, tattoos are a very important aspect that you should be paying attention to. There may be tattoos of protected plants, gods, saints, spirits. If you're looking to sort of understand that, Judica Isles' Mystic Saints and Sages is a great encyclopedia to sort of dig through. For example, a Medusa statue or the Gorgon in Greek mythology. Medusa has been turned anyone who saw her into stone. One of the tellings of this myth says that Medusa was the most beautiful of Athena's priestesses, and Medusa was raped by Poseidon. So Athena gave her the ultimate defense against further abuse, the ability to turn men to stone at a glance. Current tattooing trends empower women who have been sexually assaulted to tattoo Medusa onto their bodies to protect them from further assault. So if you see, especially given the size of the tattoo on the body, it's absolutely important to make sure that you understand what may or may not be reflected. So a large calf tattoo of one specific plant, you might want to figure out what plant that is and see what the attached association is for that plant. A sigil or a symbol is something created by a magic worker for a specific goal, but it's unknown to others. It's sort of the opposite end of the spectrum from a symbol. They usually incorporate lines and arrows to direct the flow of energy for that specific purpose. It could be letters or symbols stacked on top of each other, but symbols and sigils diverge in their use. Symbols have common usage that amplifies their magic because of a larger cultural understanding. The minute you see it, you know what it is. It's sort of a shorthand. A heart means love, a dollar sign means money, that kind of thing. But it's like a magical billboard. Send protection here. The point of a sigil is more cause specific, sort of like a prescription. I am protected from my abusive spouse. Insert full name of date of birth.
It really reflects the importance of understanding cultural context when we see symbols. It's such a temptation to immediately identify a symbol with a specific culture, with a specific metaphor. It definitely depends on the creator of that symbol. What did the artist intend that symbol on being? And as you speak of sigils being very personal, I think that's something that really is something that's important to keep in mind, because what may mean something to someone else may definitely mean something different in the eye of the beholder. And so I think that is extremely important, and I appreciate that information. In looking at religions cross-culturally and different philosophical traditions, we can see there are a number of different deities and spirits that are known as being protectors. Over the years, a number of crime scene investigators have encountered statues of different deities at scenes. Have you had any personal experience with any specific deities that may be called upon specifically for protection?
Absolutely. Every mythology you can name, and even some you can't, have their own specific gods of justice, protection, and divine order. Even gods and goddesses who have specific epithets or titles denoting an aspect of the divine to ensure that aspect that you're looking for. Hecate is a goddess of the crossroads in witchcraft. Hecate Meduniosa is the Hecate the protector, so you can invoke the guardian of the crossroads against evil intent. In Greek mythology alone, there's the Furies, goddesses of justice in Greek mythology, that go around the earth dispensing punishment, and they are symbolized by snakes. Nemesis is the Greek goddess of revenge and retribution who balanced the scales on Mount Olympus in the mortal world. She also rewarded noble acts and punished evildoers. Themis is the Greek goddess of justice and the personification of divine order, law, and custom. So if you see a statue of her in a home, they might be petitioning for justice on the personal, or especially in the law. They may have a protective order they're trying to enforce. They may be trying to petition the law to keep them safe from an abuser.
Outstanding. Well, where we stand in 2024, we live in a world where religious extremism is unfortunately a daily reality for many communities, domestically and internationally. Over the last 30 years, I've run into a lot of situations where practitioners and supply shops that offer various spiritual materials have become targets of threat and violence. I remember a number of years back when a particular store moved into one particular city, that there were various dead animals dumped onto the property of this particular store. I'm thinking of another store in one of the New England states there that ended up having, graffiti spray painted over the front of a business. And out of Kentucky, where there was a family who had opened a metaphysical supply shop, and they started receiving death threats. in 2024, what is the reality of these types of cases of extremism? And have you experienced any types of extremism to you yourself personally?
Absolutely. Even our local shops, we've had windows shot out overnight as a warning to leave the neighborhood. I've been assaulted. I get threats very regularly. There was an attempted stoning in high school. I had a man find where I live, showed up with a claw hammer, and threatened to kill me and burn my house down. I've been run off the road into oncoming traffic while the driver of the other car screamed that witches deserved to die. I was in DC in 2001 at a summer festival with an elderly couple who led a ritual in a public park. It was a very sunny Saturday afternoon. About 100 people are holding hands in a circle when a coach from the rugby league playing 2 fields over came to assault a 70-year-old priest and priestess. Just the sweetest people. I'm thankful the organizers hired off-duty police to protect us from any further evils.
Yeah, that was intense. Thank you for sharing that, Amy. Now, Amy, what advice would you give first responders at a scene that are not familiar with cultural practices of protection as they encounter scenes and possible victims?
First responders are trained to scan for threats. So you go into a home at the end of you want to make sure that you go home at the end of your shift. That's your job. Seeing things under normal circumstances could be an indicator of danger, but remember, the victims of a crime who might also be a witch, a magician, or a practitioner of an indigenous religion, they might have knives or swords or other cutting implements laying around their home. Scissors or a knife might be hung over the front door to remove any spells attached to people who enter their home or to direct religious energy during a ritual space. 9 times out of 10, they're not used to cut anything more than air. Statues of deities could look scary, but those of a fierce face use that to scare away evil, not to invoke it. The hardest part is to set aside our mistrust of the unknown and stay focused on the crime at hand, to act with compassion for the victim first.
Thank you.
Tremendous. I said but any better. Absolutely. You know, it's such a situation where 30 years ago, if 30 or 40 years ago, probably starting further back, but you know, any elements related to magico-religious practices being taught to law enforcement, particularly, started out with a false logic in that when many officers were taught when you see anything related to a magico-religious culture, that is immediately deviancy or criminality. And so there was this premise that this is where the story started. You know, if you were to see a pentagram, if you were to see crystals, if you were to see a knife at a scene in a sacred space, that this immediately meant criminal activity. And many times practitioners of different traditions of all kinds were viewed as these shadowy figures that most likely were up to some sort of criminal activity or some sort of deviant practice. And we've seen through the years, and I really hope we continue to see this tide changing in forms of education about different cultures. That's one of the things that I try to teach in my classes, is that what may at one time have been very mysterious or appeared perhaps malevolent to someone on the outside is most likely someone's culture, most likely something that someone considers sacred. And so there is no difference in between going into a scene where you might find religious items, from crosses to saint necklaces to pentagrams to a specific statue of a deity, that these are elements of sacred cultures and sacred traditions. And so I think it's very important that we continue to get this knowledge out there, that as you said, you know, looking at the victim and the situations there with compassion, that yes, this victim may come from a spiritual tradition that is very unfamiliar to you as an investigator, but understand that that person is a child, a parent, a sister, a brother, a mother, a father, and the humanity of that victim is what we are focusing on. I think it's very important to keep that in mind as, I still encounter elements of public safety that are, for lack of a better term, just kind of spooked by scenes that they don't understand or elements that they may encounter at scenes. And do you have anything to add to that, Amy, Steven?
Yes, absolutely. The most important part is that because of the institutional fear of anything that's different, whether that be religious ritual, religious items, any of that stuff, it can prevent people from coming forward and reporting crime because they're afraid of those prejudices that are sort of produced institutionally. The satanic panic is very recent in a lot of memories. So it can keep victims of crime from coming forward and saying something really awful happened because they're afraid of being judged for it. About 10 years ago, I woke up, I came outside, I went to go to Sunday brunch, and someone had spray painted, which, itch, screw you, spray painted on my driveway. I called to make a report. I didn't expect anything to happen from it, but in calling, I'm getting eye rolls and yeah, whatever, and what did you do? And it can make it very hard for victims of crimes to come forward. So the hardest part is just them picking up the phone and saying, hey, I do need some help. So putting those two.
So Amy, Steve, do y'all have any final comments in regards to responding to scenes and how we might look at not only the scene, but victims that we may encounter?
Well, just mine listening with Amy, I think I'm pretty well on the same thing. It's like coming to scene as a more holistically and look at that because everyone is different. And unfortunately, everyone has a little bit of bias, and thanks to all the media and everything, we're going to go in with some preconceived notions. But it's important to come into the scene, like I said, look at it 100% and then just narrow everything down and just be aware of your surroundings and stay safe.
Absolutely. When you're coming home at the end of the day, you did something right. The biggest and the most important thing that we can do is just not just take in the scene, but allow yourself to understand that you're going to have prejudices when we come in as outsiders into someone's home. There's always going to be little things that they didn't pick up or they didn't have available to them. Last night's dinner dishes are in the sink. That's not what we're here for. The individual materials, the religious significance of blades or wands or plants, incense, each of those pieces is going to be something that speaks very, very specifically to the time, place, and situation that victim's experienced. And that's going to be the things that we have to, we're definitely going to have to look at and see how much it does or does not impact the scene. A half-burned candle could be someone had to run out in the middle of the night. They put out that candle to make sure the house didn't burn down, or it could be that whatever they needed came to fruition. It's just making sure that you take the time to examine our own prejudices because Stephen said we're going to have those.
Absolutely.
The best first action was just listening to this podcast.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Amy. Now, Amy, if our listeners want to find you on the internet, where can they best find you?
Best bet is always amyblackthorn.com. You'll have previews of all my books. You can download them for free. There's the first 30 pages or so of each of my books is available for you to download. There's contact information on there. There's, if you'd like to talk to me, over Zoom, there's ways to do that. amyblackthorn.com is going to have not just where I'm going to be, but where I'm going and what books are coming next.
Excellent. Excellent. And as always, Amy's books are excellent and her work is excellent. And we really appreciate you coming on, Amy. And we hope we get to see you again soon.
I would really love that. Thank you.
Steven, any final words?
Amy, I just want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule and for joining us. This has probably been the most enlightening podcast I've been on, I've heard or listened to in quite a while. Like I said, I really appreciate you finding time in your schedule.
Thank you so much.
Well, again, we are Crime Scenes and Cultures, and we are glad you were with us today with our guest, Amy Blackthorn, and as always, archaeologist extraordinaire, Steven Katz. I'm Tony Kail, and we will talk again soon. Take care.
Children of changes, feather on the bow, arc of eternity, rain around the star. We are the old people, we are the new people, we are the safe people, wiser than before.